Greetings, everyone. Well, it's Comic Book Wednesday again, so that means another comic book related update, kind of an impromptu part 2 to last week's update, in which we talked about Ghost World, the movie directed by Terry Zwigoff, based on the graphic novel written and drawn by Daniel Close. So if you want to hear my thoughts on this one, check out last week's video. Now, it's kind of strangely connected in a sideways fashion to what we'll be talking about this week, because of course Terry Zwigoff also directed Crumb, the wonderful 1995 documentary about the life of Robert Crumb, world-famous underground cartoonist and creator of many, many crazy characters that have permeated the popular culture over the years. So essentially, this became the impetus for what I got in the previous one and what I got in this one. So it all ended up being kind of connected in a sideways fashion because, of course, Terry Zwigoff directed Crumb, and I guess it all started when I decided to rewatch this, and it kind of put me in a Robert Crumb mood, and it got me to thinking about Ghost World again, which I hadn't seen in a long time, and I completely forgot that this one is also directed by Terry Zwigoff. I should mention as an aside, another one of my all-time favorites, also directed by Terry Zwigoff, is Bad Santa, which has become a traditional Christmas movie in this household. But anyway, after watching the documentary, it got me wanting to check out some of Robert Crumb's stuff again, which I hadn't really looked at in a very long time. And my introduction to his work, as I'm sure it was for many of you, was Fritz the Cat. Yes, which recently got a beautiful Blu-ray release from Kino Lorber. And, well, I figured since I'm getting the first one, might as well get the second one as well, with the 9 lives of Fritz the Cat. And I thought, well, since I picked up the source material for Ghost World, why don't I also go the whole 9 yards and dive into the origins of Fritz the Cat with this wonderful collection from Fantagraphics Books called The Life and Death of Fritz the Cat. So, that's what we're going to talk about today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. So, I guess the first time I heard about Fritz the Cat was in some article I was reading about animated movies, and it mentioned it in the article somewhere about how it was kind of notorious when it came out as this raunchy cartoon featuring anthropomorphic animal characters and had a lot of social commentary about the 60s and whatnot. And I'd always been curious about it, so fast forward a few years, I'm living in Selkirk. You know, if you've seen my retro videos, you know all about Selkirk. And went to the local video store, and they had Fritz the Cat, the VHS release. So a friend and I rented it and watched it and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And I've been wanting to see it again for a very long time. I think I had the DVD release for a short time, so I'm pretty sure I did see it on DVD at some point. But that's long since gone from the collection. And then Kino Lorber put out these wonderful Blu-ray releases of both films. So the first one, of course, was directed by Ralph Bakshi and is based very heavily on the original comics by Robert Crumb. In fact, there's a couple of scenes in it that are almost beat for beat animated versions of some of the original comic strips. And then, of course, a couple years later, we had The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, which was not directed by Ralph Bakshi this time. It was directed by Robert Taylor, but both of which were produced by Steve Krantz. So Steve Krantz and Ralph Bakshi already had a pretty good working relationship, having worked a few years before on Spider-Man, the animated series. Yeah, who would have thought the guy who did a good chunk of the Spider-Man animated series would go on to become one of the most notorious adult animated film directors of all time. But hey, you got to start somewhere, right? So anyway, Steve Krantz produced both of them. Ralph Bakshi directed the first one, and then I've already forgotten his name again. Robert Taylor directed the second one. So the first one is based pretty heavily on the comics, and as I mentioned before, is full of a lot of 60s social commentary about sort of free love and hippie culture and racial tensions and things like that were all a part of life in the 60s. And then the next one, 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, focuses on the 70s, essentially, where Fritz is older and kind of clinging to his lost youth, and he's in an unhappy marriage and just trying to find direction for himself. Personally, the second one feels like it's trying too hard to be trippy like the first one, I guess, because there's a lot of very sort of surreal, psychedelic moments in the first one, and the second one kind of tries to recapture that, but I don't know, there's just something missing in it. It just doesn't quite have the same, I don't know what the word would be, kind of organic creativity to it, I guess. The first one just has this kind of rhythm to it, a flow to it, where it gets into the trippy parts, but they don't seem out of place, whereas everything seems kind of a little bit shoehorned in the second one, if that makes sense. So it doesn't quite have the same kind of flow to it that the first one does. It almost feels like, I hate using this phrase, but it almost feels like it's trying too hard, as it were, to kind of recapture the magic of the first one. But, I don't know, there's something just sort of pure about the first one that the second one I feel doesn't capture as well. They're both good, and they're definitely both very culturally significant, I think, and certainly worth checking out. But I absolutely prefer the first one by a pretty wide margin. Now, as for the original comics, I was always really curious about the origins of Fritz, because of course I loved the movies, but I'd never read the comics. I'd seen a few online, like just a few random panels and a couple random strips. So I looked up on Amazon to see, well, there's got to be some kind of collection out there. And sure enough, there was. The Life and Death of Fritz the Cat, lovely hardcover edition. Very, very nicely done. Fantagraphics Books has actually done quite a lot of collections of Robert Crumb's works. And there's another one of, say, Mr. Natural, for example, which is another one of his big popular characters. I haven't picked that one up yet, but I'd really like to. So I wasn't sure exactly how many Fritz the Cat comics there actually were. And I don't know if anyone has, like, a specific number on that. But yeah, anyway, we have just, a nice selection of them here. So this is kind of, it's not a complete collection, but it's kind of a best of collection that has just a lot of the sort of notable ones. I got to be careful what I show you here. Make sure there's not like any excessive nudity. But it's interesting because they are all presented chronologically, so you get not only the evolution of Fritz, but you also get the evolution of Robert Crumb as an artist. Like if you kind of go through the the earlier ones, his art style is a little more simplistic, but then you get to the later ones, and we get a lot more detail in the characters and the facial expressions and everything. It's just there's a lot more to them, and there's quite an extensive scene you might recall from the movie where he ends up in an orgy in a bathroom in like some friend of his place, and that whole scene is in the movie. And I didn't realize, but that's actually all beat for beat right out of the comics. It's like literally an animated adaptation of one of the longer strips in there. But yeah, as you can see, I mean, you can see Robert Crumb's art style evolving over the course of it. That's one of the things I found really interesting about this, was just kind of seeing how it progresses over the course of it. A lot more of the sort of shadows with the sketchy pen lines and cross hatching and so forth, and just a lot more depth and texture to the I don't even know what's going on here. He like climbs into some alligator girl's mouth and stuff. It's just some really weird stuff in here. Just Robert Crumb has just such a twisted imagination. I absolutely love it. Like, look at all the texture in the artwork here. Like, in particular in the Ostrich Girl's apartment and such. There's all these shadows and, you know, a lot of detail in the furniture and stuff. Oh, that's not her apartment. That's a parking garage. Yeah. So if we get to her apartment, yeah. But I should mention, as much as we all love the movie, you know, someone who doesn't love the movie, it's Robert Crumb himself. Yeah, he was not a big fan of it. It's almost like he became a superstar in spite of himself. He just wanted to do his comics and sort of let the printed page and the work speak for itself. But you know, his, I guess, agent and manager and whatever just really kind of pushed him to market and merchandise his stuff more. Of course, he did do the famous "Keep on Truckin'" poster, which just kind of became a thing that it's I don't know, it just tapped into the cultural zeitgeist at the time that you know, like, no matter how bad things get, just keep on trucking, you know, just keep moving forward. And it's a simple sentiment, and it was a very dynamic piece of artwork, and it made its way onto countless posters, t-shirts, and coffee mugs and whatnot. And he hated that. He hated that it just exploded like that. And then, after that was a big success, of course, Fritz the Cat sort of got into the you know, the mind of the public, and they thought it would make a good movie. And Ralph Bakshi in many ways is like the you know, I almost want to say the Robert Crumb of film, where he would do these like crazy independent animated features that were unlike anything anybody else was doing, like cartoons for grown-ups. What a concept. And that was very much what the underground comics of the 60s and 70s were like as well. They were like comic strips for grown-ups that you know, where there was no rules. I mean, anything goes. So they tended to be, you know, very vulgar and you know, kind of harsh, often violent. A lot of nudity, a lot of sex, and just sort of wherever the artist's imagination would take them, they would go there with no limits whatsoever, because these were just being published on a very small scale. And independent publishers, or published by themselves, so they could just do whatever the hell they wanted. They weren't bound by the Comics Code Authority or anything like that, so they could just, you know, and they were kind of sold under the counter, you know, at newsstands and whatnot, if you knew a guy who knew a guy. Yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of these came from, and I think Robert just kind of wanted them to stay like that. That it made them special in a way, and people who really wanted to find them could find them, or knew a guy who could find them, or whatever. And to turn them into an animated film was something that just didn't appeal to him. It just made it too commercial, I guess, in much the same way that, you know, Keep on Truckin' just became really commercial, and he just didn't like that at all. So he hated the movie, so much so that when it came out and was a massive hit, both financially and critically, he decided to kill off Fritz. So there's this one final adventure where Fritz just kind of goes on this adventure of debauchery. You see some of his former girlfriends that you've met in other strips and whatnot, and finally meets up with this one girl who's had enough of his shit, and she jabs him in the head with an ice pick. Bam! Fritz is dead. The end. And spoiler, and he never went back to Fritz the Cat after that. He just hated it. It's kind of funny because in the he talks about that a fair amount in the movie. Like, they touch on that. Terry Zwigoff and Robert Crumb are actually very good friends in real life. So Terry Zwigoff got unprecedented access both to Robert and his family, and you know, and was able to really kind of do a much deeper dive into all of them than any other filmmaker would have been able to. And it was mainly because they were good friends that you know, that Robert sort of allowed him all of that access. It was very candid and very open. It's an absolutely fascinating documentary. I forgot how good this was, and I just sort of dove in, and there's over almost an hour of additional footage of more stuff that didn't make it into the final cut of the film. So, I mean, the film alone is already like 2 hours long, so you get an additional hour of material that wasn't in the main film. and it's great. He's just such a strange, quirky, weird character, and just fiercely unique and original in his work. So I've always found him to be really fascinating. It's funny, I should mention as an aside, one of the things he mentions in this when they're talking about the movies is his agent's trying to get a project off the ground to bring Mr. Natural to the screen as an animated film. And at the time, it looked like it was going to happen, but then for whatever reason, the project fell through. Now, an interesting little aside, I recently watched the Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie, the one on Disney+, and there's a cameo in this family film on Disney+, of Mr. Natural. Yeah. I don't know how they managed to make that happen, but somehow they made it happen. So as far as I know, that's the only time we've ever seen Mr. Natural in animated form. I mean, if ever there was a character that is not suitable for kids in any way, shape, or form, it's frickin' Mr. Natural. But there he is in the Chip and Dale movie. So obviously the Lonely Island guys who made the movie are Robert Crumb fans, and that doesn't surprise me at all. But I thought that was pretty funny. But anyway, I really enjoyed reading this and kind of diving into the origins of the character, and it was great to revisit the movies again. These Blu-rays look terrific, by the way. Let me just give you a quick little closer look here. So we have this one, which is the first one. And it's a very, very nice edition, very classy. And what do we got here for extras? Yeah, we have audio commentary with Stephen Bissette, who I've talked about before. A number of years ago, I did a video about some of my Swamp Thing comics, and Stephen Bissette was one of the artists who kind of worked with Alan Moore to redefine the character for the series at that time. And a super cool guy. I did chat with him a little bit. He saw the video and really liked it, and we did have a little conversation. Really nice guy. But anyway, he does a commentary on here along with G. Michael Dobbs, and it has the theatrical trailer as well. I don't know that there's anything on this one. Yeah, this one is bare bones, so nothing on 9 Lives. So we don't have a wealth of extras there, but we do have some pretty cool stuff. But personally, I would suggest, as a companion piece, get the Crumb movie. Do yourself a treat. It's just a fascinating portrayal of, and inside story of one of the, like, just such a fascinating character, like just a comic book artist, and he's had such a strange life, and it's really interesting to hear him talk about it and everything. He just has so many stories to tell. And as I say, he's very frank and honest about a lot of the origins of his comics. I mean, Robert Crumb often just kind of depicted some of his weird sexual obsessions and so forth in complete naked visual form in his comics. And Fritz the Cat was just kind of an offshoot of that. Not all of his comics have animal characters in them. It was just kind of this and some of the other ones. But it's interesting to see kind of how he depicts these things, and I guess in the case of both Mr. Natural and Fritz the Cat, they kind of do think, well, like the thing I just showed you with him climbing into the mouth of some alligator girl. There's just like such weird stuff in there. He goes into that in Crumb as well, but it kind of, it just defies explanation to me. But it's interesting to me, and there's just something about it that I think, even though it's kind of really weird and off-kilter and off the wall, it taps into something in the reader that, we all have our kind of weird things like that go on in our minds, in the dark corners of our imagination. And there's just something about Robert Crumb comics and a lot of those underground comics that kind of taps into that, but in a safe way. It's the whole thing. It's like, well, fantasy is fine as long as you're not actually going out and hurting people or whatever. But in the form of like a comic with these silly animal characters that just kind of gave him free reign to just go nuts and do whatever he wanted. Not that he showed any reservation whatsoever in the comics with his human characters, but I don't know, this just allowed him to kind of, I think, explore in a slightly different way. In addition to putting some social commentary in there just about some of the social upheavals at the time in the 60s and 70s that were going on. So yeah, so if you like your comics and cartoons full of sexy anthropomorphic characters doing very grown-up things, rife with social commentary, you can't go wrong with Fritz the Cat. Well, and Robert Crumb in general. Though, be warned, some of his material is not for the faint of heart or the prudish. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. I'll put links to all of these in the description down below. Amazon links, of course, if you'd like to add any of these to your collection. As always, thank you very much to those of you who use my Amazon links, because it does help to support the stream and allow me to get more stuff to do videos about for you. Also, speaking of supporting the stream, if you feel so inclined, feel free to hit the thanks button and toss a few bucks my way. It all goes towards helping to keep things going here for you. Alrighty, so big thanks to you for watching. Big thanks to my Patreon sponsors. Be sure to catch me on Twitch. I stream just about every day, and I'll see you next time. Until then, sayonara.